so we may as well dive in. Let's see if I can find my slides. There's one part of it. Present. All right, this is week 7, I think. Hard to believe. Okay, a couple things. First, our website continues to get content. The archives from last meeting, including David Rettinger's PowerPoint, are there. We continue to get interesting articles. At least I can say that because I'm the one who's posting many of them, but not all. Thank you. Like this one this week, can you teach a transformative humanities course online? That's from Lee Scallerup, who you may remember when she worked at DTLT. What an EdTech skeptic learned about her own teaching. And finally, making online learning active. All of these things are interesting and useful. And the one that came out of today's Inside Higher Ed that I didn't get on the slide is about virtual science labs. And so I know Randy will be interested in that, and Sarah as well, perhaps. Okay. And then on the questions, Marco raised the question, can anyone provide a demonstration of the software that allows students to interact with a reading so that I know which passages to focus on while guiding a discussion? One answer to that, well, the answer to the question is I don't know, but I think he's referring to Hypothesis or similar annotation software. We will talk about that a little bit today. I could demonstrate it, though we probably won't have an opportunity to do that today. And if you're interested, I know people at Hypothesis, the company, and they would be willing to come do a demo for us if that's something that you would like to see. It would probably be later in the year because we're almost out of summer. But if you're interested, let me know and I can figure that out. Okay, moving along. Words of wisdom for today. This is from Stephen Mintz, who writes a column in Inside Higher Education. We're often so fixated on online learning shortcomings that we slight its unique advantages. And there are certainly advantages. So I just wanted to remind you of this point. You know, when we get in the trenches, sometimes we forget that each medium has its own pluses and minuses. All right, and we're not to the main event yet, but rather, no, I missed it, there we go. Remember, part of this project was inspired by the idea that we could promote what we're doing and make UMW look good and look attractive. The folks at University Relations have come back to us and asked if some of you would be willing to tell them about what you're planning for your courses this fall. We're not looking for a major effort here. Maybe 3 or 4 sentences about what makes your course compelling. And then maybe a quote that you would be comfortable seeing in an article. So if you are willing, please let me know and I will take it the next step. Plus, don't forget fame and fortune. Okay, both of those are involved in this. All right. Now, finally, the main event. How to design and support effective group activities online. This was a very popular question when we did our survey. I thought we would start by telling you stuff that you probably already know, but basically, why should you consider using group work? Well, to start, we know that online learning is by its very nature isolating. One way to combat the isolation is with group activities. Okay. Second, we know that group work is learning. Active learning leads to, or active learning activities lead to deeper learning. There are a couple of things in particular that group work does. One is it often makes students verbalize their thinking. And by thinking through their thinking, they're likely to learn more. Additionally, group work provides the opportunity for students to correct other students' mistakes, which can be less painful perhaps than hearing it from us. And certainly it's more believable when students tell other students the same thing. This is useful for a couple of reasons. One is because when students teach, they learn better than when they just are in the audience. Additionally, research shows that students are less likely to make distracting errors if they have to explain their work to other students. So this is just barely touching on the advantages of group work, but there are genuine reasons to do this. And when we looked at the role of lecture, one of the things that we pointed out is breaking up your lecture with group activities is a way to make the lecture more effective too. Okay, now the literature on group work is vast. I was trying to think about how I could summarize this literature in no more than 90 minutes. And this is what I came up with. Okay. We can talk about pedagogical approaches to group work. We can talk about infrastructure required for group work. We can talk about tools, and we can talk about tasks, group activities, group exercises, and things like that. And I want to spend a little bit of time on each of these, some more than others, based on what I think your interests are. So let's do it. In the pedagogical approaches category, there is this whole genre of team-based learning. There is project-based learning. There is cooperative learning. I don't expect you to remember all this stuff, but those are links to good explanations of these things. And when the slides get put on the website, you'll be able to have access to this stuff. If you can't wait, you can do what I have done before, which is take a quick screenshot. But most of you could probably wait. Okay, let's talk about infrastructure. There are common workspaces. There are common communications channels, like Slack, for example, that we're going to talk about a little bit later. There is software to support specific activities and deliverables. Okay, so these are things that you probably want to think about when you're considering particular group activities. Okay, and then finally, tools. There are polling and quizzing tools that help you get a quick read on what your students are learning or not learning. They also provide a way to break up a lecture. There is Slack and Microsoft Teams. There are various data visualization and analysis tools that are useful for people teaching something that has to do with data. Today, I want to talk specifically about polling and quizzing, and then Slack and Microsoft Teams. Anand, you have experience with polling, right?
Yes, I've used Poll Everywhere, and I've also used the Google Forms for polls, and I'm happy to show a couple of examples of that if you want, when we get to it.
Oh, well, let's do it.
Oh, okay, awesome. So let me share my screen. Can you give me the power, Steve? All right.
You have the power.
Awesome. Let me pull this up. So let me just show you very quickly. I'm sure many of you have already played around with this before or have seen it used. I've used Poll Everywhere for a number of times over the years, and I think even just quite a few years ago. It's a free tool. They do have an upgrade that's available. I've never paid for the upgrade. The free tool will allow up to unlimited number of questions and 40 responses. So if you have a much bigger audience, it's not going to be effective without the upgrade. But for most of our classes, this will work out pretty easily. What's nice about Poll Everywhere is that it does not require somebody then to have web access. They can actually access and respond to this with a text message. And that was really the distinction between this and using something like a Google form. I think either one would work well with online teaching, although most recently for the last year, I've almost always just used Google Forms. But let me just show you an example of this. So if we have, I made a quick poll that I'm going to then give you the link to. And actually you can find it. When you share the whole screen, you have a number of options. And after you've created a short poll, then when you get to the point of presenting, you have a shareable response link. And I'm going to, then you can share that. And if you have it active, you can just take this link, which is my username. And let me open up the chat and I'll put this in here. So I don't know why it shows up as that long. It shouldn't have to be that long. If I just put in pollev.com/AnandRao106, if you click on that bottom link, then this is what opens up. And so you can just share that simple link, and it's basically just the link to my account. And because I've activated this particular poll at this time, that's the one that will show up. So go ahead and answer this. Go ahead and put the link into your browser. It's pollev.com/AnandRao106. And I kind of wanted to see what you all thought about how many days we're going to be able to start in the semester before we have to move fully online. So we'll see what the sense is of the group. Now, if I enter a response, and you'll see that then I have the chance to clear the last response, but I'll put the answer, and I have it set up so that they won't just see the responses yet. You could just give them a link that'll give them immediate response, and they can see what the layout is going to look like and see what the responses are like. But I kind of like having them run it for a few minutes, and this is something you might even share in the chat. They can open it up. You don't have to share your screen. And then when you get to that point in the lecture, if you want to be able to share the results, then you can pull it up. And you can have a series of these ready. So if you want to do just a quick poll to see how well people are doing the reading, you can have some simple questions. That's an easy way of running it. So this is what the page looks like when you send it. And then I have opened the another browser window that shows the results. And so you can see 13% say we'll start remote, 13 say 10 days, and so on and so forth. You could always just have this page open, and what this gives then the viewers the chance to be able to see the link right here at the top, where they can enter it, or they can text AnandRao106 to 37607 to join, and then they'll get a text response saying, now you're a member of this text group, and then they can respond with A, B, C, D, E, or F, and they can enter the response that way. So the real benefit of Poll Everywhere, I think, is the flexibility of being able to allow for text messaging, to be able to enter a response, or to do it through a web browser. And you can see real-time responses. You just saw somebody just entered a response there, and you can see how it plays around. I would admit about a third of the time I use these just for more whimsical ways to interact. I often would do a question of the day or something at the beginning just to see how people are reacting to things. It's a good way to make sure people are awake. If I see only about half of the class has responded, then maybe then I can say, okay, obviously not everybody's doing the poll. What's going on? Let's make sure everybody's paying attention. It's just a good way to get a quick pulse of how people are reacting to things. So I think this works out pretty well. And I love seeing that many of you are changing your votes, moving to 30 days. I don't think we're going to make 30 days. I didn't know
we were allowed to do that.
Yeah, actually, that's what's kind of fun. If I have this first link that I sent out and I put down 60 days, then, because it's already been entered for mine. But it will give you, the first time you do it, a button here at the bottom that says clear last result. So you can clear it and then enter another vote. You can set up a number of these. You activate them, turn it on, and then that one's the one that they find when they put the link in for your account. And then you can close that one and move on to the next one. So that works out pretty well. Now, this is what I would use in class face-to-face, because they could just pull out, if they have their phones out anyway, this is a good way to make sure they're using it for the right purposes. It's a fair way to get a vote. I've also used this a couple of times when I've had a discussion in class about making a change to an assignment, and I want to see how the students feel about it without them having to disclose how their vote is, especially if it's something that might be a little sensitive. I can put the vote on here, they can text it, and then it's anonymous. And it will limit it to one vote, like especially if I do it with the text, it'll limit to one vote per phone number. So that's fairly reliable. I mean, it's not that I would want to do all voting this way, but it's a good way for them to be able to do it anonymously. You could also add questions that are open-ended text questions. They can answer something that way. Doing it via text, that could be okay. I mean, our students are going to be fairly adept at being able to type something into a text box fairly quickly, but you also don't have a chance to be able to work through that other than showing it live on the screen. So you might be able to do that just to collect some information, but I think Google Forms are a little better for that. So pretty straightforward. And I think this is something that it's very easy. If you just go to polleverywhere.com and just click create an account, I believe you can create an account using your Google account or your Apple account, or you can create one with your own username. And that'll give you the free access to indicate that you're in higher ed. And then it gives you unlimited number of questions, up to 40 responses per poll, and you're off and running.
Anand, I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
So the comment is, if you have a really simple kind of poll, I have used the chat box as a quick way to get a read of things. Obviously,
absolutely,
that's not anonymous, but like in asking questions like what topic do you want to, out of these 3, should we do next week? Those kinds of things work pretty well. But I'm pretty impressed with how easy the poll everywhere seems to work.
Yeah.
So my question is this. It seems like poll everywhere would be great in a synchronous session. Have you ever used it for asynchronous?
I have not. Asynchronous, typically if I'm doing it asynchronous, then I don't need the immediate response up on the screen.
Right.
And if it's asynchronous, I'm not as concerned with their being able to use a text response.
Sure.
They're already at a web browser, so I use Google Forms for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for asynchronous, I don't know the Poll Everywhere stands out in my mind as something that I would necessarily want to use. What's great about Poll Everywhere is that I've even used this before, but I haven't done it at least for a year. You can embed a Poll Everywhere poll in a PowerPoint slide. And so if you have a presentation in front of a large audience, this is a great way synchronously in front of a big audience, put it in the PowerPoint slide. You can include a slide that gives the information on how to enter their vote and then move to the next slide and it shows the live results. And I've done that before with bigger audiences, and that's pretty great. That's a more engaging way of presenting the information. You can't do that effectively with a Google form. This works really well with a live audience and synchronous teaching. I think you're right about that.
For people that haven't used Google Forms, what's the learning curve like?
It is incredibly easy. And actually, I put the same poll into a Google form. And you know, if you've never used this before, if you have a Gmail account, you can access this just by going to I think this is listed as under Docs, but if you just do forms.google.com, you will end up with a page that'll show you forms, and they have a lot of different templates. If I just do a blank form, and there we go. If I want to do a visualization, this is what it looks like. You know, it's just as simple as putting that in. You can add all kinds of questions to it.
I've used Google Forms a fair amount, though never for polling per se, but certainly for surveys. And one of the things that I like about it is, could you click on the multiple choice menu there? There are lots of different kinds of questions, from short open-ended to longer open-ended questions. So
You
it
can
does.
get fairly complex questions in there
Yeah.
and check boxes that have only one response per each. I wanted to show you what the results look like here. So let me take this, I'm going to copy it into the chat box and let you respond to this one. So if you go in, find that link and then put your answer. I'm going to submit it. And this one allows, you can say that they're not allowed to give another response, or they can allow them to have another response if you'd like. But what I've used this for, quick polling, and then you share the link in the chat. And when you come back here, if it's my Google form, not only do I have the questions, and I can't enter answers here, it's just for me to set up the questions, but I can look at the responses. And what's great is it gives me this great visualization that I can share on the screen. So this is another cool way of being able to do the polling. And I think it works out really well. If you have multiple questions, you can go question by question. I think their data visualizations are really easy to follow, and they're somewhat interactive too, so I can hover over it and I can see 5 people voted for this, 5 for this, 10 saying only, one person said 10 days, one person said 0 days. This is a little more interactive. I think it's a little bit better eye candy than Poll Everywhere. And it's very responsive. If they have a web browser open, this is a great way to have some questions ready. It's very easy to set them up. And I like the responses, and this kind of data reporting per question works really well.
So some of you out there are probably thinking that Anand and I planned me asking this question. The answer,
we did not.
The answer
I don't know what it is.
No, we're just thinking in similar ways, I guess. Anyway, also in the chat, I noticed that Mindy mentioned that Socrative also allows for polling and quizzing. I'm not familiar with Socrative. Can you say anything about that, Mindy? Is it easier, harder, different?
It's similar to set up. I like Socrative because I can set it up either as a single question, or if I have a series of things, I can set it up as a series of quiz questions that'll advance. I can set it up to auto advance, but I usually control the pace. So I'm using it as a jumpstart for discussion where they're doing something and then they're responding, or they're doing something and presenting it to the class and the rest of the class is trying to categorize it. And so I can move forward, so I can preset some things.
Nice.
It does integrate well with PowerPoint. I don't typically, when I'm doing it, I typically just jump to that website and we'll show it, but it integrates well there. I also like it because I can flip between multiple formats. So I can have them doing a poll 1 minute, and then I can do a word cloud the next, where they're responding with text and it's creating the word cloud. So it lets me use a couple of different things at one time. I'm just in the free version. I'm not paying for anything, but it has a nice look. It's pretty straightforward. They just sign in with my name as the name of the room, and then I can have one set of activities active at a time. Given that I'm only teaching one class at a time, it is very much made for synchronous classes. Just something to play around with. If you're interested, in 5 minutes, you can kind of see what's there and see if it suits your style at all.
That sounds awesome. I have not used that before. I'm definitely going to test that out before the fall, because I'd like to do more of this. I'm a little concerned that even, I'm teaching 2 classes that are hybrid face-to-face, with people being so distanced in the class and with masks on, which I'm going to be a real stickler about. I'm afraid that the discussion is going to be a little harder, and we're going to feel a little less connected than we would, even if though we are in the same room. That I'm thinking I want to incorporate more of this synchronously. And then also for people that are going to be logging in, if I'm able to do some sessions through Zoom with the people that are in the class and people that are doing it from home or their dorm room, that using some of these tools I think will be helpful. So I look forward to checking out Socrative.
And Socrative will let you have students sign in so you know who responds in which way. I have always used it anonymous. I'm using it as a real-time activity in class. I don't care who's saying what. I'm just using it as a discussion point or a check on their understanding or confusions. But it does have greater ability to give you insight into who's doing what, or you could use it as an attendance check kind of thing.
That's excellent. And so then you have the results later to go back and check if you wanted to. I mean, I know you're using it just in class, but you can always refer back. That's excellent.
Yeah, it saves a report at the end of every session when you close it out. regardless of whether it's anonymous or not. I just then immediately delete it because I don't
Yeah,
care.
you don't really
But
care.
it does save the report automatically.
Nice. I was going to say about Poll Everywhere and Google Forms, one thing I mean, Poll Everywhere will give you those results later too. I haven't, most of the Poll Everywhere uses have been fairly superficial for me, so I'm not that concerned about having it later. For Google Forms, I will use these for sometimes more complex sets of questions, and I love that I can then get the spreadsheet. And so I can, you know, create a new spreadsheet, and then it'll give me the results that I can go and find and parse through if I need to. So that's one thing I like about Google Forms, and I just use so many Google Docs that it's very easy for me to keep it all organized. But I definitely look forward to checking out Socrative.
For my FSEM, for about 10 years, I've been doing a pre-semester survey of the students. In fact, I'm going to send that out this week. And it has about 24 questions in it. Some of them are about the students. Some of them are about how they think they learn, what their experience is with writing, speaking, and research. Anyway, then I use the results in this format the first week of class, and I demonstrate to the students what they've told me. And it's an interesting way for students to learn about the group that they're in. And I also learn a tremendous amount from the survey as well. So highly recommend it.
I have a couple of questions. First, well, it's great to see Poll Everywhere in Google Form. I was wondering if any of you guys had used it during the either online teaching or during the remote half semester we had. To just check, I always find it awkward when one starts the session in Zoom or whatever, and is trying to figure out if everybody can hear you, if everybody can see things, and just to check. And I was always trying to find, I mean, I used Canvas chat or the Zoom chat, but I always found it awkward to get the responses one by one, saying, you know, and then basically I had to ask the opposite question, was like, can somebody not hear me, to get everybody sort of, okay, now we can move on to the lecture or to the activity. Have any of you guys used either of these pollings just to check if everybody's with you given times during a synchronous session? And is it fast enough so that it doesn't drag on or become something that, you know, that sort of freezes the momentum of the class?
I've used polling right within Zoom for that. You can, when you set up a meeting, or for that matter, as long as you've turned it on in your settings, you can create a quick poll. You can either do it in advance, and so it's ready to launch at some point during your class, and you can have multiple polls, or you can do it on the fly. And when I've had days where we've had particular tech problems, I have used just a quick one question. Can you hear this? Can you not? Kind of thing. You need to make sure you have it turned on in settings before your session starts, because like all the Zoom settings, you can't change them mid-session. But I've liked that, where it's just integrated right in, it pops up, it's on people's screen right in front of them in Zoom. They don't have to go anywhere else. I wouldn't use it for more complex stuff. And then you can show a graph if you want to. I think it does a bar graph, but I've used it for check-ins.
Okay, that's
more than
great.
anything
I
else.
did not know that existed. That's great to know. And the other thing that I wanted to ask, something that Anand brought up, which is I'm teaching one of my classes as HS, so hybrid. And this is a more general question, not just for this particular tool, but in general, I'm thinking synchronous, the synchronous tools and discussions we've had in translating it to the in-person part, and then everything that is off or asynchronous being activity and more. But is that something that we are going to discuss in the class, or we can sort of at least bring in for those of us that are going to be doing something hybrid? How do we translate what we're doing here into potentially having in-person interaction? Is it clear-cut synchronous equals in-person, or not necessarily so? I don't need an answer right now. I just wanted to bring it up so I didn't forget.
Great question. Marco, you could help if you sent us that question perhaps on the website, thought about a way to articulate it. I don't think it's as simple as synchronous equals face-to-face and asynchronous equals online, because you can do, I mean, think about our courses. Most of the work that our students do in our face-to-face courses, they do outside of class, and that's sort of asynchronous, right? So, but it's a great question because I hadn't thought about that. Thank you. Any other questions about polling? All right. Well, then let's move on to talking about Slack and messaging. I have used Slack on a number of projects, but I have never used it for an extended period of time. So I'm sort of very much a casual user, I think you could say. For those who are not familiar, Slack is an instant messaging tool that allows you to communicate with a group, a large group, small group, or with individuals in that group. I think of Slack as a voice pipe direct from you to one or more people with whom you want to communicate on a regular basis. I have an image that, since I went to the trouble of tracking it down, let me share it with you. Mindy's smiling, I like that. It was actually harder to track down than I expected. Maybe that's a sign of my age. All right. Okay. You present. All right. Okay. This is the bridge of a ship, and apparently they don't do this anymore, but this was the Queen Mary. And what you see that I've highlighted in red there are those voice tubes or voice pipes that allow the captain to communicate with different parts of the ship, right? So in my mind, that's what I see Slack as. It's a communication channel which is as narrow or broad as you want to make it. Students often say that they get so many emails that they don't pay much attention to email. Slack is a way to more dependably communicate with your students, assuming that they commit to paying attention to Slack. Slack has other tools besides instant messaging, but it's really the instant messaging function which is the central feature of it. Now, some of you have used Slack before, and so I'd like to start by opening discussion up to Ben, who has used Slack in his classes, and then we'll go down the list of people that said they would be willing to talk. So, Ben. Yeah, I see Ben. He's here. I can't hear you, Ben. Are you muted?
Yes, apparently I was muted. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I was just saying, I am by no means a Slack master, but I did use Slack after we went remote last semester in my upper division course, Sexuality and the Origins of Modernity. You can see on the screen a screenshot that I took of some of the old materials in that Slack. And basically students had asked me you know, gosh, I miss our class discussions and I was missing them too. So this was the answer to reintroducing a sense of class discussions into the course. I should say I was also having students post more formally in the discussion section on Canvas each day of our virtual meetings. And I thought that was really important. What I wanted Slack to do was to feed into that by giving students a chance to more casually interact with one another as they were reading and as they were starting the writing process. And it was also a chance for me to come in and interact with the students. So for anyone who hasn't used Slack before, you can see over on the left the two main channels. There are, elements of Slack. One is the channels, and I've set up channels for Foucault, the Princesse de Clèves, and same-sex sexuality. So those were three important modules in the second half of that course. And then down below, although I've largely cut it off just to keep out student information, you can see it starts listing the people that you have invited to the Slack. So you can see Professor Labreche and then one of the students, and there'd be a list of further students down there. So this is really easy to set up. Let's see. I'll talk about what's great about Slack. The fact that it's easy to set up, and the fact that it did successfully recapture a lot of that energy that we had before we went remote. This was a great section. And students were bouncing ideas off of one another. They could go into kind of sidebar conversations, and that was wonderful. It was also important at times that I'd be able to come in and kind of point out like, okay, well, what's the big historiographical issue in what we read? You know, what's the forest instead of the trees? It's also really important, right during the chaos of going to virtual, we were doing our Foucault unit, which sets up the theoretical structure for the whole second half of the course. And Foucault is not easy for the students. But you can see here how I was able to come in discussion and kind of pull out and highlight, okay, you were talking about tone, like that's great. Let's connect that to the repressive hypothesis. And later down on that screenshot, you can see, okay, I'm pulling out the incitement to discourse. These are key concepts I wanted students to be able to see themselves in later readings. I'll also say as a plus, it was really manageable to participate in Slack, both for the students and for me. And it was really, as a teacher, selfishly, it's much more interesting than discussion posts where you have set up all the topics beforehand on Canvas. I felt like, you know, I was having a real interaction with students here. I also had some reservations about Slack. It's very hard to organize, at least as far as I'm aware. I think if I were doing it again, I would have a formal activity where students go back into Slack and put material for their own projects, be those essays or exams. And Steve, I thought it was interesting how you were saying it's a great way to communicate with students. I would say personally, I thought it was not a replacement for email because it does lack a lot of structure.
And Ben,
also, yeah, Steve.
You use this as a discussion forum in a sense.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Go on. Sorry.
So for me, the important part, I mean, I hope that some of what I contribute is important too, but for me, the really important part was what students were posting. So that's just part of my process here. What's frustrating is that when conversations develop, they take place over in a sidebar on the right-hand side. I didn't include that because, again, I wasn't showing student information if I didn't have to, but that sidebar is not necessarily connected to what's in the center of the screen. It really compresses writing visually, and I just am not crazy about that. And I'll also say that because this graphically only shows so much at a given point in time, it's not great for longer posts. I don't think it's a replacement by means for the discussion posts on Canvas. or the assignments on Canvas. So they're just a different set of intellectual muscles that we exercise on Slack. I'll also say, and I'd love to be proved wrong here. I'm considering rethinking my position here, but because the program is so visually fluid, might even say chaotic, I think it might be best designed for smaller groups and more skilled students. It worked really well with 300 level students. It worked really well in a small class with only 13 students. My experience was over half of those became really power users, and another quarter using it, fairly frequently. But with, say, my English 205 students who are of a more variable degree of both kind of knowing what we're doing and of commitment to the course, and who are much numerous, I just had my doubts about whether it would work as well. So I'm thinking about exploring it 205 students in the fall, but I'm just not committed there. But maybe other people have used it with bigger and less advanced students. I'll just say I'll just say a couple of final things. One is that I'm not sure that my experience would have been as positive if we hadn't had the first half of the semester to model good class discussion skills and also to develop a sense of community. So I think if I were to reuse it, I would need to think about how to kind of set us up in a more structured way. And in terms of evaluation of work, it's a little like class discussion generally. It is challenging to be really rigorous and quantitative about how you evaluate it. Personally, I treated it mostly as upside. I didn't worry too much if a student was using Slack infrequently. I had other ways of tracking day-to-day participation. So that's what I've got to say.
Hey, Ben, I have a question.
Yeah.
How did you articulate your expectations for participation, right? I mean, I similarly have struggled with assessment and evaluation and had similar challenges with any kind of quantitative anything, but I have a really hard time talking to them in a way that feels organic about what my expectations are for participating. If I say like, make X number of Slack contributions per week or something like that, that feels very mechanical. And it strikes me that it kind of like represses good conversation because students are focused on a quantitative number, but then I don't, on the flip side, know how to tell them to participate without telling them like what I expect that participation to be.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I can say anything other than that. That is exactly how I felt about Slack. So I had every Tuesday and Thursday turn in a more formal discussion post on Canvas, and that was sort of the quantitative part of what I was assessing, and then Slack was sort of the fun add-on where I just didn't. I was participating myself. I would go on most days briefly to kind of respond to people. And I think that helped, continue the momentum of discussion. But I just didn't worry about formalizing it, I guess.
Hey, Will. One of the things that I found is that freshmen need more structure, like post 3 times a week. But the more experienced the students are, the less they need that. And that's worked for me, at least.
Ben, can I ask you a question? I'm curious if you have a sense of how familiar your students were with Slack before you started using it in class.
Oh, that's a good question. It was variable. I'll just say, I don't think anyone was living their life on Slack, but some of them had used it. Some of them definitely had it. But I have to say, I think the learning curve, I'm sure there are clearly, I don't doubt that there are things I don't know, but the learning curve, basic functionality that you need for a discussion I found it very intuitive, even as someone who is not by any means a techie.
Yeah, I've played around with Slack for non-academic purposes, and it's easy to use, right? Like it was intuitive enough to figure out. It's more the checking in, right? Like I've never become a hardcore Slack user because it's one more thing I have to check. It's one more thing I have to remember. I kind of think of Slack as like a closed group Twitter, right? Like it doesn't have the same character count, but it kind of functions as a Twitter thread, organized by the hashtag. And it's one more thing to check. And so I was curious if your students were flowing into this because they were already Slack users, at least enough of them were, that it kind of created that sense of, well, I'm already in Slack anyway. I'll flip over to my English class, away from my podcast, away from my friend group, or if it was something that they were new to.
You know, I think with my group, the real issue was that they were a participatory group already. And so they wanted that for sharing their ideas, and they got along with one another. They would respond to one another much more than at least I found on discussion boards in Canvas. I think you bring up the issue of kind of it's one more thing to check, and I totally agree with that. That would raise issues about how many channels you set up. And how time-bound the work on each channel is, because if we moved on from Foucault to the same-sex sexuality unit, I would not necessarily go back and check the Foucault channel. And that was okay for our class because we moved on to same-sex sexuality. Everyone was just posting there. But I could see a class that is even more asynchronous than mine was, or a class where you wanted organization in the discussion, so you were breaking out maybe every day's topic as a separate channel, and you could end up with a ton of checking that you need to do if you had too many channels.
Claudine, you've used Slack, haven't you?
Yeah, I've used it for 5 or 6 years.
Can you tell us about your experience?
Yeah, I started using it in the summer, and it's the only thing I used in the summer. This is where they introduced themselves. I had a bio. They wrote a little autobiography channel, and they put things there, and they would respond to each other. I tended not to use a separate response thread type thing. I had them just respond to each other. This is where they submitted papers. This is where I sent back voiceover videos. I created a pets channel, which everybody seems to love. They share pictures of their pets all semester. And that was a big connecting point last spring when we went remote, and they would get new puppies, or they would get new kittens, and they would post them as they're, when they happy birthday each other and all of that. And I also use it for peer reviews. They send their papers to each other on Slack, and they copy me at the same time, because in the direct message you can send it to however many people you want. So it's to one person or 2 or 3, and I actually think it's super organized, because when you go into that list on the left, where it has the channels and the communications, it brightens up when there's a message for you, so there's a message. You can set it so you get an alert on your laptop or on your phone. So often when I send things, I get a response immediately. And students have used it, like, where are we meeting for pizza? I told them they could use it for whatever they want, and they might have study groups, and they communicate back and forth about that. They'll send me a quick message. I've used it instead of email. I said, don't communicate with me on email. It's going to be all through Slack, because it is organized where you see direct message there. All of the people who are communicating with you are listed there because it's active. And you can click on their name and you get all of your communications with them. All the submissions, everything is there. And so I've used it for everything, for the kind of class communication and connections. They submitted videos last year, last semester on that. I started using it for pretty much anything I could think of. And I generally have found that virtually nobody has used it before. And it is a start from scratch. And I've made little voiceover videos and posted them. I also have a course website and I post it there, but I also post it on Slack itself. So they get the invitation, they get there, and then there's these little, 5-minute videos explaining them how to do direct message. It's kind of neat too, because if you click on your own name, you can send yourself things. You can send yourself your shopping list. You can send yourself the PowerPoint you're going to use in class. So it's a nice backup for course material. I don't think it's perfect. It can get a little confusing. I've had students with kind of disability issues that it is one more thing for them to look at, and that does become a little complicated for some of them. And they actually have to pay attention to their alerts and look at things. But most of the time, I think it's worked quite well. There's only a handful of people that I know who use it. But like I said, I've used it in the summer, and there's no face-to-face meeting there. Those are all been strictly online courses. And so they get an email at the beginning telling them this is what we're going to do. Here's, I think I've sent a voiceover video that way just to get them started. And they're submitting things the first day of the summer session. And I can't remember the last time somebody had problems. The only problems have been if I submit the wrong email for them to be invited. Obviously, they don't get it. But if I send the right email in the invitation, it works fine. So, and if you accidentally send the wrong message, you can delete it pretty quickly. So I kind of like that.
So Claudine, you used it for a greater variety of purposes than Ben did.
Yeah.
And so to speak to Mindy's question, did you then get really good buy-in on the part of your students?
Oh yeah, well they have no choice. It was pretty easy. They have no choice. They have to use it because we're not using email, where everything is papers are submitted for all their assignments, the drafts that we go over, they do peer review, the final papers to me, all of that they have to do. So that hasn't been a problem. In the spring when we went remote, I then created channels for different class discussion days. And so they knew they go to that one and they were like, where is it? Where is it? And they would have their class discussions, and they was just instant messaging each other. And I actually thought it worked well. I got students who didn't normally talk in class who participated because they weren't getting cut off because everybody was kind of typing at the same time. So the messages, the responses were a little bit mixed up, but everybody got their word in and they kind of liked that. So, and some students actually seriously improved their discussion grades by being able to contribute more by doing it on Slack. I gave them the option of using Zoom or whatever, and they went, no, we'll keep doing this. And some did it synchronously and some did it asynchronously. I just kind of left a lot of it up to them. And they seemed to like it. I had one student, again, with some disability issues that struggled, he said, with kind of keeping up with things. And we had to do a little bit more email. That was more comfortable for him. But other than that, I didn't have any problems.
Great. Does anybody else have experience using Slack?
I was just gonna add, if you don't mind, that can you all hear me? I can never tell. Okay, thank you. Sorry. I was just gonna add that I've used it in semi-similar ways, but one way that I used Slack about a year ago in my senior seminar class was to just organize a large class project that everyone was split into small groups to kind of complete a piece of the task. And one thing we did, because we wanted to kind of keep it as this this project based, everybody kind of has a job. 2 of the students volunteered to be what we decided to call communication coordinators, and they coordinated the Slack channels and the Slack groups to ensure that all of these smaller groups had their smaller group discussions. Everyone was in the right place within Slack, and then we could have these larger discussions to say, okay, this group is finally finished, you know, coming up with an advertisement for something we were doing, and then they could share it with the larger group. So that worked well.
I've struggled this summer thinking about the easiest way to have informal conversations about the class. And I wonder if Slack might be a good way to do that. I think that could work. But I do like the idea of using Slack for multiple purposes to make it worth students' while learning another platform, because we know they have concerns about that as well. So,
Steve, I think one of the things I picked up in looking at the New York Times, the business section, Slack is there all the time. There are lots of issues about Slack this, you know, the corporate organization, the competition, how it's doing, how many businesses are using it. But it is widely used by businesses. And I throw that out at students to say that might help you get a job if you put on your resume familiarity with WordPress, Slack,
a student could say, yes, I'm a history major, but I'm also fluent in Slack.
Yeah, well, a familiarity, you know, I can do WordPress. I've used Slack, I've used Omeka, I've used whatever, you know, I'm not some clueless nerd in a book, you know, kind of person.
And on that note, I think we will segue into talking briefly about Microsoft Teams. Teams has much of the same functionality of Slack. I've only used it a very little bit. The big advantage of Teams is that it's included in Office 365, so all faculty and students already have it, whether they know it or not. Many users don't find it as good as Slack, but it's there. We have it, so something to think about. All right, has anybody used Teams?
I used it for a doctor's appointment, but not for classes.
Great. Well,
you know, I haven't used it for class yet, but I've used it for some committee work at several different groups, and like the task force, and using it for the COVID class. And it's a little bit clunky, but it works all right. And it's integrated also with OneDrive. So it's a great way to keep common files all together. And given that everybody has 360, I am planning on using it in the fall. I mean, it's not as smooth as some of the other tools, but given that it's integrated, it looks okay. And they're doing a fair job of upgrading it. So I've seen some changes over the last 6 months.
Good. All right. So let's move back to kind of the main event, which is talking about the different kinds of group activities that people can use. Let me see if I can find that slide. There we go. Here is a non-exhaustive list of the things that can be done. These were the ones that I think I chose from a much larger list because I thought they were interesting and I thought they would be of general interest. Obviously, you can have small group discussions. Doing online oral presentations and discussions is going to be our topic for next week. You can also use small groups for problem solving. I used both in my classes and it's worked very well. Mostly I've used these asynchronously, but I can imagine doing small group discussions in breakout rooms in Zoom, for example, in the fall. Collaborative brainstorming is something that you can do as a group activity to figure out any number of ideas or issues or problems. I've done that successfully. Collaborative note taking is kind of fun. You know, a problem that I found moderating discussions in real time in the classroom is that at the end of a really good discussion, we may not have any record of what the great insights were. So I have taken to choosing a couple of students, usually a pair, to do collaborative note taking. And between the two of them, they do a pretty good job of capturing what we said. And then they go back and they clean up their notes and bring them back to the class for the class to approve. As I said, that's worked really well. I don't expect the note takers to participate in the discussion, nor do I expect the rest of the class to take notes, though some of them do. Collaborative reading and annotation. The first time I used Hypothesis, I was really struck by how powerful the experience was of reading asynchronously, but seeing what others in the group thought was important and seeing what questions they came up with. And when I was able to, responding to those questions. I am going to use Hypothesis for this purpose this fall in my FSEM. I think this broader pedagogy, if you will, is going to provide scaffolding to enable my students to get through more difficult materials than perhaps they would be able to do on their own. So I am looking forward to doing that. There's collaborative writing, collaborative presentations. Many of us have done those things before. And there are opportunities for peer feedback. And finally, there's collaborative research. Mindy can speak to that, I'm sure. Okay. Now, some of you in your homework for today listed some really interesting things that you were thinking of. So Elizabeth, could you say more about what you wrote down?
Yeah, so I mentioned a couple of different things. So one in an online class using a collaborative kind of low stakes group activity that I've worked on the past few years, actually in a gender comm class. And that one I have, this class has been taught fully online. And at first I wasn't thinking that a group project was a great idea, but it's worked out really well. And I kind of keep it all in perspective and I've adapted it each time. And in the latest version of this over this past summer session 1, the students were they had a conversation on Canvas to split up into groups. So it comes towards the end of the class, topics they want to explore a little bit more and communicate in creative ways. And so then once they're in groups based on interest, then they have to kind of choose a platform in which they want to communicate these. So, you know, I've had students that will make kind of a make your own adventure game about gender in the workplace, for example. And one of the things I did this time was ensure to them that I have a way to know who did what, and kind of reframed it as a more of a it's collaboration, but it's also more that we just want to see a more robust way of looking at a topic. So they don't need to worry so much about another student not doing what they should be doing. You know, some of them make Facebook pages. I had someone do that this semester, a really interesting Facebook group where they analyzed song lyrics and throughout different decades, and each of them had a decade to analyze the music. But so that's worked out really well. And then I think the other one was I know I maybe wrote too much for the homework, but one was for my small group class, which I'm teaching in the fall in both hybrid and online form. And I've only taught it face-to-face before, so I am kind of recreating how this is going to look, but essentially it's a community engagement course. And so it has obviously that component to it, but students work in a semester-long project where they attack a wicked problem in the Fredericksburg community. And so it involves, it's a scaffolded assignment where they have several due dates throughout the semester that culminates in a persuasive speech to how to solve this particular wicked problem or ways to solve this particular wicked problem. And so that's been, you know, something that's gone well in the past that I have to kind of reconsider what that's going to look like. Particularly, I don't think it's going to culminate in a face-to-face persuasive speech, I would imagine, by the end, but perhaps in an online format or over Zoom or something like that, and being able to share the results with the people that they interviewed and collaborated with within the community is one of the goals of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're more ahead of the game than many of us.
Am I?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't feel that way, but okay.
Mindy, you've got some ideas, don't you?
Some of my research methods class, our research methods class in psych is built around these group research projects, generally groups of about 4 students working together. And then that's paralleled when they either do their independent study research teams or their senior research seminar. So we follow this lab-based model that is generally how research is done in the sciences, and we're modeling that. So the collaboration is central to how that class is designed. And so teaching that in the fall, it's going to be fully online. I've spent a great deal of time this summer thinking about how to keep the good aspects of it and try to head off what I think could be the worst aspects of it. So I've always done self and peer evaluations at multiple points throughout the semester and with key assignments, but I've built in more of those. So now anytime they have anything submitted to me collaboratively, they are doing a specific targeted self and peer evaluation, as well as more global ones at midterm and the end of the semester. I'm going to have them, this is the first time I've done this, I'm going to have them do a collaboration contract as a group. So when they, in week 2 of the class, they are going to have to come up with a contract. I've got guiding questions for them. So they have to think about how often will you communicate with each other? Using what forms? Have you exchanged contact information? When you have a collaborative assignment due, how far in advance does everyone in the group expect to see that? Right? Some people are last minute. Some people want stuff a week in advance. So they have to negotiate that. And if they can't come to consensus, they have to hand me whatever, digitally hand me, whatever they've come to. And then I will work with that group to develop a more specific plan. I want them to think through what their expectations are. I've had groups in the past set up Discord servers to have group communication. I've also had other groups where they haven't even exchanged phone numbers or emails. So I'm trying to avoid some of that. So I've spent a lot of time trying to find ways where I can both facilitate the communication that they need, but also have frequent check-ins for me. So if something's going awry, I know early and can start to step in. Waiting till midterm is too late in that class, especially in a fully online environment. It can go wrong. I'm also this semester taking away the ability for them to form their own groups. The other methods professor and I have worked together to develop a group match survey in Qualtrics that we're going to use to put them in groups based on interests and availability and things like that. because the normal ways that they would meet each other through lab activities in the first couple weeks and form groups aren't going to be there. Even if we're doing activities synchronously in an online environment, it's going to be different. And for the people who don't have a core friend group, they're going to have a really hard time finding a group, and having a core friend group is not always the best way to have a group. And it sounds like people want to see my draft collaboration contract. I am happy to share that. I guess I'll send it to Steve and have him, he's got the email list for everybody, and have Steve send it out to everybody.
Sounds good. Thank you. So when I was reading the homeworks, I was really struck by one of them, and that was Kate's. Because what Kate said was that, how do you do acting, creating scenes, not in a face-to-face environment, okay? So I wondered if, Kate, if you would spend a couple of minutes telling us a little more about what you're trying to accomplish, and then maybe we can come up with some ideas for you.
Sure. So
I guess the holodeck is out of bounds.
Right. So we have to do group work in acting because it is a practical application. To be honest with you, I'm preparing as if we're going to go all online so that I'm covered and all good in case that happens. That said, I did just request to go hybrid with the acting classes because I also feel like that might work better because they're 24 a section. And I feel like splitting them into 12 and 12 might be safer and also work better for students who might be off campus to begin with. So I'm all in on hybrid, but also preparing for completely online. So we have to do group work. I've changed the scenes, and I've been on all these acting teacher calls like since March. Everybody's freaking out basically, you know, how do you teach acting this way? But I'm changing all the scenes that I do so that they could work more on screen in case that happens. Scenes with no contact, those are hard to find, you know. Masks, Anand said something about masks. We're gonna be acting in masks. So it just totally changes the class because you have to work on different things like physical presence instead of, I mean, you have to change how you look at human connection. But yeah, we have to have partner work. If a student says, I really can't do it, I will say, okay, let's find a great monologue for you. And I'll just adjust for the student.
But that wouldn't be your first choice.
Well, and they want it. Last semester when we pivoted rapidly, we'd already selected the scenes and they were intense scenes. It was an acting 2 class. You know, we couldn't do them with moms walking through the dining room. Like it wasn't gonna work. And so we didn't continue scene work. And the students, we did have a live component and we collaborated and we created things and it was acting. But the students were like, we really want this scene work. We miss this scene work, you know, and it is part of acting training. In the intro classes, I'm not doing sort of intense scene work, but they still have to work in partners to do things like learn to observe someone's physicality or body movement. I'm probably boring you all because you all probably like aren't interested in acting, but you know, they have to like study a person and observe them. It's very similar to communication, right? A persuasive speech is a monologue, right? So I can do that work, but then we have to have some group dynamic as well.
Kate, I'm wondering if you're thinking at all about pantomime for the students to be looking at that, either studying silent films or pantomime today.
Yeah, I thought about that. I thought about clowning, just sort of changing the class a lot.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they have to learn basic skills of critically analyzing a text, interpreting a text, creating a character with voice and body and presence.
It's quite a challenge. Good luck.
but it does work, right? People
Yeah.
teach acting online. You can take acting online from a really famous, actor. So I mean, it does work.
Yeah.
It's just kind of reframing basically everything you did and being like, no, this thing that I thought was so important isn't important at all. It's a lot of letting go, which I'm sure y'all are doing too.
How much of it is physicality? Because interpreting a text at the beginning doesn't have to be in real life, right? I mean, it seems like you could do a lot of these things in pairs or small groups in Zoom, maybe.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing. I'm pairing them up with a text that is much simpler in Zoom, meeting half the time on Zoom or in person if we stay in person.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, yeah.
Apparently you've got 30 days. Any other thoughts for Kate?
So some really funny comments about masks. I mean, it's gonna be weird. I'm not gonna lie, I bought a face shield because I'm a little bit scared. So I'm gonna be teaching, I'm gonna like put gems on it. I'm gonna like bedazzle it or something. So it's not scary for students, but it's gonna be really different.
I love it. I'm also kind of wondering if for, performative aspects, if it might be good for a student to have a face shield instead of a mask, just so that you can see the nonverbals. I mean, I think that's an incredibly important part of what it is that you're teaching and what you're working with. I hadn't thought about that for, I don't know about doing that for public speaking, maybe. I mean, I would rather that they're wearing a mask than a shield because I think the shield might not be as protective, but that might be a good workaround. I like the idea of bedazzling it though, that's awesome.
Yeah, and they make these masks that also have a clear plastic over the mouth for accessibility really, but that might be an option as well.
Great ideas. Anybody else?
I have one that I might, that it didn't occur to me to write in the homework because I was just thinking about a totally different class, but I have in the past in face-to-face classes done similar things to what you're talking about, Steve, with collaborative note-taking using wiki software, where I set up an installation of either MediaWiki or DocuWiki on my domain of one's own space and create accounts for everyone in the class. And you can set it up either by class session, or I've done it by reading too, and then basically ask the students to build collaborative reading in class notes on a wiki. So it's like an internal class wiki. And then, at the end of the semester, they have it as a study resource.
Is there a reason why you do that in a wiki rather than say in a Google Doc?
Well, I hate Google Docs.
Okay.
And also I think it organizes better. And I also think it's, this is something that, reflecting what Claudine was saying before about Slack, is I think that it's, it's a particular set of digital software skills that students can take into the outside world, right? And I also really hate Google Docs. I'm thinking about doing it with using, this semester in one of my classes using Timeline.js, which is a program that builds timelines, and the back end is actually a Google Sheet. So I'm gonna have to get over it. But you basically use, you enter, events or date ranges or whatever into a Google Sheet using a very particular, they give you a template Google Sheet, and then the Timeline.js generates a very visually appealing timeline out of that, right? So I'm going to ask the students to do that collectively in one of my classes too, because I think one of the problems with being asynchronous is that, I'm going to have a hard time keeping the students located in the chronology, right? We're going to be bouncing around thematically. And, one of the things that I often can do more effectively face-to-face is to remind people, like what decade we're in, sort of, in the 19th century. So as a way to kind of replicate that, ask them to be making 3 or 4 entries every week into this timeline, which they then all have access to, so that we can be constantly situating ourselves in time.
That's a great idea. I like that. I'm going to be teaching a seminar this fall analyzing the recession that we're currently experiencing. I did that during the Great Recession 10 years ago, and it worked really well. And I think that using a timeline would be, or creating a timeline would be very helpful in sort of framing the analysis that we're doing. So thank you for that. Anybody else? All right, well then we will call it a day, and look forward to seeing you next week when we're going to be talking about oral presentations and debates online. And I will see you then.